Today, I'd like to talk to you about why I think you should stop railroading your players and embrace sandbox style campaigns or adventures for Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop role playing games. Hi, I'm Jared. This is In Character Games. So, before I start trying to convince you how sandbox games are, for me, and I think probably for you, a superior kind of game, I think we should probably do a little bit of definition first. I know many of you already know this, but let's really define what is a railroad and what is a sandbox. So a railroad style campaign is what it sounds like, a campaign on rails or an adventure on rails where there are not a lot of choices on what the players do to get through the plot of the game. Of course, in every scene, in every encounter, the players are going to be able to decide whatever they want to do. They're playing the characters. But the plot itself is predetermined and is going to go from, say, scene A to scene B to scene 3. Scene 3? Anyways, you get the point. You're going to have this linear plot that the players are kind of forced to travel along in order to complete the adventure or play in the campaign. This might be a series of adventures if it's a campaign, or it might be a series of encounters if it's an adventure, but there's not a lot of choice in where the players go and what they do outside of what they do within a particular scene or encounter. On the other side, you have sandbox style campaigns and adventures where somebody has written an entire area of a world or an entire region or even an entire world, and you let loose the players in that region or in that area, and the players go wherever they want to go. So is this a binary choice? No, absolutely not. Like many things, it's a spectrum with railroad on one end and sandbox on the other. And where you and your game and your players fall on that spectrum is really up to you. And hopefully you discussed the style of game that you're going to be running in your session 0, and you know that this is what your players have signed up for. And so knowing where you're targeting along that spectrum can really give you a lot more power in building out your campaign and building out your adventures. Before we go further, let's talk about some examples in modern 5th edition and other styles of games about railroads versus sandboxes. So on the railroad side of things, the initial wave of 5e adventures and campaigns were very railroad style setups. You had Princes of the Apocalypse, Horde of the Dragon Queen, and many more that I can't remember the names of, that were essentially chapter 1 is about this adventure that leads to a plot that brings you to chapter 2, which leads to chapter 3, 4, and so on. And there was no real choice in how the players got from chapter to chapter. There may have been less railroading within, say, adventure sites, and we'll get to that in a minute. But in general, I would define these styles of campaigns, the chapter by chapter plot based campaigns, as railroady. Now, a quick aside here. There is nothing wrong with a good railroad campaign. I know the point of this video is to convince you to play more sandbox style games. But look, if you and your players really want a plot, if you have a plot that you really want to tell in your campaign and you need to drive the players from point to point to get that plot told, by all means, play that game. It's not the kind of game I prefer, but it can be a very fun game. I'll go into a little more why I think you should try to embrace the sandbox mentality more in a bit, but let's go back to our examples. So on the sandbox side of things, you have the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons modules that were released, things like Against the Giants, Descent into the Depths of the Earth, and other original AD&D modules, even going back to basic D&D, the Keep on the Borderlands, Expert D&D's Isle of Dread. These were all super sandbox style campaigns or adventures. They presented a place, they presented some bad guys in that place for adventurers to come up against. And if there was a plot, it was really thin and it was woven deep underneath the motivations of some of the key NPC antagonists. But it was not like, you have been hired to go do a thing, you have to go do the thing. It was really presented as, here's a space for you to explore, now go explore it. The new Heroes of the Borderlands starter set for 5th edition is probably the closest that we've come in a long time to a true sandbox setup for 5th edition. So much so that it got a lot of grief online after its release by people running it, dungeon masters, who said there's no plot here. To the point that Wizards seemingly responded to that criticism by creating a free article on D&D Beyond about essentially how to add plot to Heroes of the Borderland. And that kind of drives us to that middle ground, that hybrid game that is really a sandbox with a plot laid on top of it. And this is, to me, this is the sweet spot of gaming. It gives players the choice, and we'll talk more about player choice here in a minute, but that hybrid game is really a sweet spot. A perfect example of this one is Curse of Strahd. Like, the realm of Barovia, Castle Strahd itself is all set out before you. You can go wherever you want, you can do whatever you want. So you're in a sandbox. But laid on top of that is the plot of Count Strahd, his demise being the only way that players can escape Ravenloft and return to their homes. So you have this sandbox set up, but there's something driving forward the story. There's a plot laid on top of the sandbox. And so these hybrid games are what I mean when I say stop railroading your players and play more of a sandbox game. I'm not saying you have to go all the way to the other end of sandbox and just have a zero plot, open world, do whatever you want. I'm saying focus on that hybrid, focus on that middle ground of creating a sandbox and then layering a plot on top of it. Another example of hybrid game is Order of the Stone, a series of adventures I wrote for Call of Cthulhu for Chaosium. The first adventure of that, Terror on the SS Champagne, is a hybrid sandbox with a plot game. The whole game takes place on a stricken ocean liner crossing the Atlantic. And the players are introduced to this ocean liner and need to figure out what's going on. So there are a whole bunch of places on the ship that they can explore in whatever order they want to. But beside that, in parallel, there are a series of plot points that will drive the adventure to its inevitable conclusion that you as a game master, or sorry, in the Call of Cthulhu term, keeper, you as the keeper can really decide when to spring on the players. The adventure is written so that they go in a certain order, but you can mix that order up. And when and where that happens is really up to the keeper so that they can control the level of build-up and the tone of the session they're in or the game that they're running. So again, another hybrid sandbox with a plot laid on top of it. All right, hopefully you're starting to see where I'm going here. One other thing that I want to point out that a lot of people don't really put two and two together for is that the most common version of a sandbox is the classic dungeon crawl. If a sandbox is defined as an area that the writer or you as the DM have set up for the players to explore, and they have freedom of choice as to where to go about that area and exploring that area, how more concise can you get than a dungeon crawl, right? Every room has multiple exits, or most do, have multiple exits. Your players can choose which direction they're going to go. You've created, instead of just a linear plot, if your dungeon is super linear, you're on a railroad. But most dungeon crawls have all these different exits and ways that you can go and things that you can explore and discover. Very definition of a sandbox. The amount of times I've talked to people and they don't recognize that those sorts of dungeon crawls are sandboxes is, well, it's happened more than once, so I thought I'd mention it. And that kind of brings me to another good example of dungeon crawls. And that is Dungeon of the Mad Mage, the Undermountain Waterdeep adventure that is level upon level upon level of dungeon that players can explore down into to find what's going on with the Mad Mage and this dungeon beneath the mountain of Waterdeep. And so yet another example of to me, sandbox with a plot. Now the plot on that one's a little thinner than, say, Curse of Strahd, but it's still there, and a perfect example of a classic dungeon crawl as sandbox. Why do I like sandbox games so much? It really boils down to two main things. The first one is player choice. I hinted at this earlier. Player choice is so important to me. The act of choosing to do something really drives home who a player is, what that character is, and what's important to them. And so when I bring in player choice and open up a map and say, where do you want to go? The players have to choose now where they're going, and they're going to really lock in on that choice, and that choice is going to matter to them because they made the choice. It isn't some plot that I've come up with and said, go from point A to point B to point C. It's them choosing what they want to do, and by making that choice, it just feels different. It gives more buy-in to the player, and it really allows them to own that choice and really just buy into the game world more. So player choice, that's number one. I love giving players a lot of choice and a lot of freedom, and I think that when they make those choices, they are more invested in the game and the game's outcomes. Okay, so the second area that makes me just really love sandbox games is GM prep time. You're gonna look at me like I'm crazy. You're gonna be like, whoa. I've heard about these sandboxes before, and GM prep time is through the roof. I know. I'm in the middle of writing an indie TTRPG that is all about sandbox hex crawl style exploration. I know how much work it is to write a sandbox campaign. But there's something they don't tell you when they talk about how much work it is to build a sandbox. And that is the joy you get of creating it is so fundamental to how we as game masters or dungeon masters or keepers feel about our adventures. And the secret to all of that prep is that once you've done it, every other session after that, your prep time is really, really small. Now, you can divide this prep time up. Just like as if you were running a linear campaign, you would prepare Adventure 1, then you would prepare Adventure 2, and then you would prepare Adventure 3. You can do the same sort of thing with a sandbox. You're going to say, whoa, Jared, the players can go wherever they want. How can I prepare Adventure 1 if they can go wherever they want? Well, they only have so much distance they can travel, right? So if you think of the area around where they start as Adventure 1, and then the areas past that as Adventure 2 or 3 or 4, you can break that prep time up. I prefer to do a lot of prep up front in these sandbox style games, and the thing I love about that is, I love just world building and digging in and figuring out what goes where and why. But the other side of that is I have so little prep that I have to do session by session because I've already built out the entire sandbox, or at least I've built out so much of it compared to where the players are that I know no matter where they choose to go, I'll be prepared for them when they get there. And so there's something very freeing about, condensing that prep time into the creation of the sandbox, and then knowing that from that point forward, I'm free to prepare even less between sessions. So between player choice, world building, and prep time, like they tie together so well and just make me love running sandbox style games, especially when I do sandbox with a plot. It's just the best kinds of games I've ever run. And I think you'll find that the case too if you give this a try. So let's talk about a couple of the criticisms that people have for sandbox games. One is the most common that I hear is, well, there's no plot. Well, if you're using a hybrid style where you've done a sandbox and layered a plot on top of it, of course there's a plot. We talked a little bit earlier about Heroes of the Borderlands and how, like, if you don't layer that plot on top, a lot of modern gamers are not going to get it. They're not going to enjoy it. There are players, though, who work within a sandbox style campaign and really understand that the plot is the exploration. If you and your players have decided that a pure sandbox with no overarching plot sounds like fun, and you really have a group of players that the exploration is the thing, then go for it, right? But if you're the type of group that needs a plot to drive things forward, then have that sandbox and layer the plot on top. The other criticism, rather, that I see a lot for sandbox style games is the players can go where you don't want them to, or the players can go to a place where they can get themselves killed. This actually did happen to me in a Curse of Strahd campaign where the players cracked open the wrong boxes in the wrong attic and oops, sorry, vampires, and everybody died. And that leads me to the cure for players can go anywhere is signposts. And what I mean by that is you have to really telegraph to the players what areas are dangerous and what areas are not, and where they should be considering. If you're playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and your players are in a sandbox and you say, well, everybody knows there's giants in the hills and they're first level, and they go, well, let's go into the hills, you should pull them aside and say, look, I tried to signpost for you that giants are in those hills. That area is really dangerous, especially at your level. Hopefully you're signposting enough that you don't have to have that explicit conversation, but you can always have that if you want to. Or you can let them go off and see the giants and go, holy crap, that giant's eating a cow. I should probably not fight it, and let them run. Or if they engage the giant laughs at them and knocks them around a little bit and then gets bored and wanders off, and the players are left to lick their wounds. But by signposting these dangers, by giving them clear indication that danger is ahead, giant webs hanging from the trees, gee, I wonder if there might be giant spiders there, or skulls hammered to posts, just let the players know, here there be danger, and ensure that players are able to run away if they choose to. Sometimes players will do things where they make running away impossible, and you just have to let the chips fall where they may. But you can always use plot reasons to not have a total party kill if that's not your style. For me, when I signpost enough and players make all the wrong choices and they get themselves killed, that's part of playing TTRPG. Don't ignore all the signs of dangers and get yourself into a situation where you can't get out of. I'm happy to throw NPCs to aid them. I'm happy to, have NPCs or bad guys do non-lethal damage to try to capture them and give them an escape mission or something like that. But sometimes you just have to let them, a TPK be a TPK. Okay. The other criticism I've seen often is that not only is there no plot, but there's no direction or purpose or guidance. And for that, I suggest you take a hard look at the modern MMO structure for things like quest hubs, right? Wherever the players are starting out is probably like a quest hub. It's a safe place where there are going to be NPCs that will tell them about the giants in the hills and the spider webs in the trees in the forest and the skulls on posts that they've seen out in the plains. Those rumors can drive players, not only signpost to them that there's danger there, but as an adventuring group, they're going to be like, there's danger there, we got to go. And if you give enough of them to them, then hopefully they can look at that list and be like, oh, well, this seems something like we can handle, or this seems like something we can handle, and that seems like something that clearly is out of our league. So quest hubs, very common in modern MMOs and also very useful in sandbox style games. We've talked a good bit about why I like sandbox games, some of the criticisms of sandbox style games, and how I overcome them. But let's take it a step further. There are whole games where baked into the game system is this idea of sandbox exploration. Many of the OSR games fall into this category. Forbidden Lands from Free League, Mutant Year Zero, games that are like at their core, they're about doing this exploration and this hex crawl or sandbox style. And I'm going to throw my hat in that ring as well with Of Hearth the Harrowing. This is an indie TTRPG that I'm currently writing. We're in the last throes of doing art and layout for the core book, but all of it is based on kind of 3 pillars. And I'm not going to go into all of them today, but one of those pillars is exploration, is a sandbox style campaign. And after the core book is out, I'm going to release individual smaller books, each detailing a region and an adventure site or a more in-depth adventure site that all taken together will create a large land for the players to explore and a big sandbox. So if that sounds like something that's of interest to you, I'll leave a link to the website down in the description below. I hope this has been helpful. Along the way, you hopefully learned a little bit more about sandbox games, how you can overcome some of the criticism of them, and why I really think that you should embrace this style of sandbox with a plot for your next campaign or at least adventure. If you do, let me know in the comments how it goes. If you'd like to support the channel, see more videos like this, you know what to do. And again, if you want to see more about what In Character Games is building Of Hearth the Harrowing, our indie TTRPG, I'll leave a link in the description. There on the website, you will find access to our newsletter sign up. If you sign up for the newsletter, then you also get access to our invite-only Discord server. So would love to see you there. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.